Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge and pay tribute to several distinguished individuals whose contributions have been instrumental in shaping Dow's historical records. Firstly, I recognize Dr. Hashim Shariat, the magazine secretary in 1970, for his early efforts to document Dow history in Dowlite International, 1970. I also extend my deep appreciation to my mentor, Dr.
Shafiq Rashid,
an esteemed faculty member who graduated in 1972 and who played a vital role in shaping Dow. Dr. Shahid Yusuf, class of 1975, whose contributions extended beyond graduation.
Dr. Amin Haji Karim,
Dow 1977 batch, whose dedication to preserving Dow historical documents, and Dr. Shirshah from the Dow 1980 batch for his contributions to today's topic is the birth of Dow Medical College. There are two documents that would be our source of discussion. I have invited our two guide historians to discuss.
So we are starting today in Hyderabad, Sindh.
Right.
But I want you to picture this. It is the early 1940s, and it is not the kind of place you would see in a travel brochure. It is hot, it is dusty, and there is this very small medical school trying to operate there.
And operate is definitely a generous word for what they were doing.
Yeah, exactly. It is struggling, it is massively under-resourced, and frankly, the powers that be at the time, the medical authorities in British India, they look at this place and they basically see a dead end.
It is the absolute definition of a humble beginning. Although, honestly, humble might be underselling it. It was chaotic. But the reason we are looking at this today, the real mission for this deep dive, is that this isn't just a story about a school failing.
Right.
It is about how that specific failure, that exact rejection, inadvertently created one of the most significant medical institutions in the entire region.
Dow Medical College.
Exactly, Dow Medical College.
Yeah. And for those of you listening, we aren't just going off Wikipedia summaries here. We have a seriously deep stack of archival documents for this one.
Really fascinating stuff.
We have this incredible firsthand account called Birth of Dow by Hashem Shariat. We are looking at a document called 6 Decades of Milestones, and these incredibly detailed statistical rolls of students that span from the 1940s all the way through the 1970s.
And I just have to say, those statistical roles, they are deceptive.
How so?
Well, you look at them and they just look like dry spreadsheets, you know, rows of names and enrollment numbers. But when you actually start analyzing them, they completely map out the history of the entire region.
Oh, for sure. Partition, the oil boom in the Middle East, shifting gender dynamics, it is all hiding in that enrollment data.
It really is.
So the goal today is to trace that resilience. How exactly do you go from being a rejected, underfunded proposal in Hyderabad to a massive, sprawling university system in Karachi? Because looking at the files, the origin story isn't some grand, brilliant vision.
No, not at all. The origin story is basically, we are about to be shut down.
Right. It is sheer panic.
To really understand that panic, you have to look at the year 1941.
Okay, let's go there.
The Indian Medical Council decides it is time to standardize everything. They want to get rid of the old medical schools that basically just granted licentiates, which is like a lower tier of medical qualification, and they want to upgrade everything to degree colleges.
Got it. So it's an upgrade or perish kind of situation.
Precisely. And the administration in Sindh knows this. So they invite these inspectors to come check out the Hyderabad facility, hoping they will just give them a stamp of approval.
Let me guess, that did not go well.
It went terribly. In 1944, a team of 3 inspectors from the University of Bombay arrives, and we actually have their names in the records.
Oh, who were they?
Dr. Mulgankar, Dr. Yad, and Colonel Jalal M. Shah. These guys were the ultimate gatekeepers. And they didn't just say no to the upgrade, they outright disaffiliated the institution. They effectively killed it on the spot.
Wow. I was reading through their report, and I fully expected them to complain about, you know, a bad curriculum, or maybe say the professors just weren't qualified enough. But that wasn't it at all, was it?
No, the faculty was actually fine. The problem was entirely physical. It was the stuff.
The infrastructure.
Exactly. They cited a lack of an anatomy museum. They had no dissected specimens, and there wasn't even a proper library. But the absolute deal breaker, the thing they hammered on, was what they called clinical material.
Clinical material. It sounds so bureaucratic.
Huh.
But when you stop and think about what that actually means for a medical student.
It means bodies.
Right.
It means living patients with a wide variety of pathologies, and it means actual cadavers for dissection. The inspectors were brutally honest about it. They said Hyderabad, at that specific time, simply did not have the population density or the hospital infrastructure to provide enough clinical material to train 40 doctors a year.
That is just a really grim reality check, because you can't learn surgery from a textbook. If your city doesn't have enough sick people or, frankly, enough mortality, you literally cannot train a surgeon.
You really can't.
So the inspectors aren't just being mean for the sake of it. They're being completely practical.
Highly practical. So they issue an ultimatum. They say, if you want a medical college in Sindh, you cannot stay in Hyderabad. You have to move the entire operation to Karachi.
Which brings us to the actual logistics of this move. Because moving an entire college isn't like moving into a new apartment.
No, you don't just hire a moving van.
Exactly. We are talking about delicate medical instruments, all the administrative records, the staff, and presumably whatever meager clinical material they actually did have.
It was a massive, highly coordinated effort. The archival documents really highlight a trio of guys who made this happen. There was Dr. Himandis R. Wanwani, who was the Minister of Public Health.
Okay.
Then you had Colonel J.E. Gray, the Inspector General, and Mr. Apin Shan, the Executive Engineer.
And one thing that really struck me in the sources is that they didn't just guess at what a new college should look like. They actually went on a study tour.
That is right. They essentially went on a road trip across India. They toured Bombay, Lucknow, Delhi, Amritsar.
And if you think about what they are seeing in those cities, they are visiting places like King George's Medical College in Lucknow, which is this stunning, massive piece of Indo-Saracenic architecture. They are seeing these established, well-oiled machines.
Okay.
And then they have to go back to Karachi and build something comparable completely from scratch in the middle of a war, essentially.
The timeline is what always gets me about this part of the history. Sir Hugh Dow, who is the governor of Sindh and obviously who the college is named after, he lays the foundation stone in Karachi on December 10th, 1945.
December 10th.
Yes. And then on December 31st, 1945, New Year's Eve, the college officially and physically transfers from Hyderabad to Karachi.
That is a wild New Year's Eve. Just imagine the train ride or the convoy. It is the dead of winter. You are literally hauling the future of medical education for the entire province, and you don't even have a finished building to move into yet.
They really didn't. For almost a whole year, this prestigious new Dow Medical College was basically squatting in the NJV high school building.
A high school.
Yes. They were just making do with temporary classrooms while the actual college was under construction. It wasn't until November of 1946 that they finally moved into the iconic building we know today.
And what is crazy to me is that amidst all this total chaos, the big move, the temporary high school digs, they still somehow managed to admit a class. June 1945, the very first batch, 45 students.
And this is where we get our first real, tangible look at the demographics of the era. Out of those 45 students, there was exactly one Muslim girl.
Just one. Ms. Famita Sheikh.
Ms. Famita Sheikh. The sources make a very specific point of naming her, and it really paints a picture of the social landscape of pre-partition India. You really have to imagine the kind of pressure that was on her shoulders. She is not just a student. She is a pioneer in a very literal sense. She was navigating a heavily male-dominated space, all while sitting in a temporary high school classroom.
And then, just as they are finally getting settled into their new building, the entire world turns upside down. 1947. Independence and partition.
It was an absolute existential crisis for the college. Virtually overnight, the jurisdiction shifts from the University of Bombay over to the University of Sindh. But much more importantly, the demographics of the faculty just completely fractured.
We talk about brain drain a lot today, but this was an instant brain drain.
Completely instant. Professor Bose, for example, who is basically the cornerstone of the pharmacology department, he migrated to India. A lot of the senior Hindu faculty members left. The sources actually describe the period between 1945 and 1948 as running on a skeleton staff.
I saw a note in the archives about Colonel Gray, the Inspector General we mentioned earlier. He was constantly visiting the building just to try and remove bottlenecks. It sounds like they were putting out giant fires every single day just to keep the doors open.
They were doing way more than just putting out fires. The professors who stayed behind were pulling superhuman shifts.
Like who?
Well, Dr. Hamid Ali M. Khan had to take full charge of pharmacology because Bose left, and that was on top of his own normal duties. Dr. Mushtaq Hassan was covering both pathology and therapeutics.
Wow.
And these are not just extra classes we are talking about. These are entirely different, complex medical disciplines.
It sounds like a complete recipe for disaster. You have a skeleton staff, a country in the middle of a violently chaotic partition, and students trying to work in a brand new building.
Yeah.
And yet, there was this one statistic in the records that I actually had to stop and read twice.
The exam results.
Yes. The first batch of 20 students took their professional exam in October 1947.
And the result was 100%.
100% pass rate. Now, play the skeptic for me for a second. Was this just great inflation? Was the board just being nice because, hey, it is partition, let's give these kids a break?
There is absolutely no evidence of that in the sources. In fact, medical boards in that specific era were notoriously strict because they were desperately trying to protect the imperial standard of education.
Right, that makes sense.
That 100% pass rate is a total anomaly. It really suggests that the crisis actually forged a much tighter bond. The students knew they were the very first batch. The faculty knew they were holding the line. They just completely refused to let the external circumstances dictate the quality of the education.
That is the literal definition of resilience. So the college miraculously survives its birth. By 1950, the first true graduates, 9 of them in total, leave the portals. The institution is, as the sources phrase it, complete. But as we know, a medical college is not just a degree factory, it is a culture.
And the culture at Dow was fascinatingly autonomous.
This is the part that really surprised me. We tend to think of the 1950s as a very strict, orderly, hierarchical time period. But the students at Dow seem to be completely running the show.
They really were. The student union was formally established in 1953. But here is the real kicker. The constitution for the union was not handed down by the principal or the faculty. It was entirely drafted by the students themselves. Specifically, Mr. Mohammed Sarwar and Mr. Salaman Karatella.
That is incredibly rare. Usually, the administration writes those bylaws specifically to keep the students in check. But here, the students are writing the rules to empower themselves.
And they absolutely used that power. They didn't just organize political protests, they organized the culture of the city. The annual musharas, the poetry readings they put on, were legendary.
Yeah, the sources mention that.
The documents say these weren't just little college events. The entire city of Karachi waited for them every year. It became a primary cultural hub for the whole metropolis.
And they were building their own infrastructure, too. The lending library is probably the best example of this.
Yes, in 1952, the administration did not build a lending library for them. The students realized, we simply cannot afford all these expensive medical texts. So they pooled their own resources and started one themselves.
That is amazing.
It began with just a handful of books sitting in the union office and eventually grew into a critical academic resource.
Which honestly makes what happened later so much more tragic. We have to jump forward in the timeline a bit here to 1991.
Ah, the 1991 crackdown.
Yeah. The sources are actually a bit vague on the exact inciting incident. They impartially just refer to it as an incident on the premises.
Yeah.
But the reaction from the state authorities was overwhelming. There was a complete ban on all political parties on campus.
But it went so much further than just a paper ban. The district magistrate actually went in and physically sealed the student union offices.
Yeah.
He put a padlock on the door.
And because that lending library that the students built was physically inside the union office,
The books were essentially held hostage. If you think about the irony of it, it is staggering. The students built a library from scratch to help each other learn, and because of political tensions, the state literally locked them out of their own books.
and they were locked out for 5 whole years.
5 years. It wasn't until 1996 that Professor Shafiq Qureshi actually went to court to get official permission to break the seal and reopen those doors. It is a very stark reminder that student politics at Dow was not just a game. It had very real, severe consequences for their daily education.
Let's zoom out a bit here. We've talked a lot about the internal culture, but I really want to look at who these students actually were. Because the data, those general strength tables we mentioned at the start, they tell a massive story about Karachi and its place in the world.
The sheer growth is explosive. You go from those original 44 students in 1945 to over 1,100 students by 1970. But the column that really catches my eye every time is the role of foreign students.
This blew my mind. I just assumed a medical college in Karachi would serve Karachi. Maybe rural Sindh. But I am looking at this list, and it has Saudi Arabia, Iran, Jordan, Sudan, China, South Yemen.
Just in the 1970 to 71 academic year alone, there were 56 students from Saudi Arabia, 26 from Iran.
But why? Why was Dow the prime destination for the Middle East?
You have to contextualize it with the geopolitical timeline. In the 60s and 70s, the Gulf states were just on the absolute verge of their massive infrastructure boom. They had all this oil wealth starting to come in, but they did not have the established university systems built yet. They didn't have their own high-level medical colleges.
So Karachi was basically the nearest established center of excellence.
Exactly. It was functioning as the Harvard of the region for medical training. Dow wasn't just training local Pakistani doctors, it was training the foundational generation of healthcare professionals for Saudi Arabia, for Jordan, for Yemen.
That is a form of soft power that I really don't think people fully appreciate. Those 56 Saudi students eventually went back home, they became chief medical officers, they built national hospitals, and they probably maintained a lifelong professional connection to Pakistan.
Absolutely. The alumni network of Dow isn't just a national network, it is a geopolitical web.
Now, we need to talk about probably the biggest shift in all of the data, the gender flip. We mentioned Ms. Famida Sheikh being the only girl back in 1945. By 1970, the rolls show 285 women. But the real explosion, the crazy shift, happens in the 90s.
This is arguably one of the most significant sociological moments in the entire history of the college. Up until 1990, there was a strict quota system in place for admissions. A set number of seats for boys and a set number for girls.
Which, as we know, usually meant significantly fewer seats for girls, keeping the ratio artificially skewed toward the men.
Right. But in 1990, the Supreme Court of Pakistan steps in and abolishes that quota entirely. They declare, no more quotas. Admission is now based strictly on open merit.
Now, what happened?
The floodgates completely opened. In that very first open merit batch, 220 girls were admitted versus only 73 boys.
That is a landslide, 220 to 73.
It completely inverted the demographic overnight.
This is so fascinating to me because usually when people argue against affirmative action or against quotas, the general assumption is that pure merit will naturally favor the dominant group, which in this historical case would be men. But here, the quota was actually acting as affirmative action for men. It was artificially protecting them from the competition.
Precisely. Once that artificial barrier was removed, the raw data clearly showed that the female students were simply outperforming the male students in the entrance metrics. It forced a complete reevaluation of who the typical medical student was. This whole missing boys phenomenon became the new major topic of discussion on campus.
So we have this college that has survived a chaotic partition, navigated intense student uprisings, trained the medical elite of the Middle East, and completely flipped its gender ratio. And then we finally hit the modern era, the transition to actual university status.
But before we get to that, we definitely have to mention the fire.
Oh, right. The 1985 fire.
Yes. A short circuit started a fire in the main auditorium, which had been built in '73. It completely gutted the place. And in true bureaucratic fashion, it stayed closed for over a decade.
Wow.
It wasn't until 1996, that exact same year, the library was finally unsealed, that the auditorium was rehabilitated and reopened. 1996 really seems to be the year Dow woke up from a slumber.
And it seems like that momentum just keeps building and leads right to 2004, the ultimate upgrade.
The birth of DUHS, Dow University of Health Sciences.
It officially stops being just a college.
It becomes a massive ecosystem. Under the very first vice chancellor, Professor Dr. Masood Hamid Khan, it dramatically expands. They bring in institutes for nursing, for dentistry, biotechnology. It goes from that one single building that Colonel Gray was frantically inspecting in 1945 to a massive citywide network.
It is a really long way from that dusty school in Hyderabad.
It really is. And when you sit back and look at this entire arc, from that brutal rejection letter in 1944 to the full university charter in 2004, It completely challenges how we think about institutions.
How so?
Well, we always tend to focus on the bricks and mortar. We look at the Anatomy Museum or the Lending Library as the tangible things that define the college. That is exactly what those 3 inspectors looked for in 1944. They thought the college was going to fail because it didn't have enough jars of preserved organs.
But they were wrong.
They were completely wrong. The college didn't survive because of its facilities. It survived entirely because of its people. It survived because students took the initiative to write their own constitution. It survived because professors willingly did triple shifts during a violent partition just to keep the classes running.
It reminds me of that clinical material point we talked about at the very beginning. The inspectors saw patients as just material for training. But this history shows that the real material of the college, the foundation, was the sheer will of the staff and the students.
That is the ultimate lesson here. You can burn down the auditorium, you can put a padlock on the library for 5 years, you can literally move the whole thing across the province on New Year's Eve. But if the human element is resilient enough, the institution survives.
It leaves you with a pretty profound question for the modern day, doesn't it? Today we're so obsessed with facilities. We want to know who has the best lab, the nicest campus, the most expensive tech. But looking back at that skeleton staff of 1947 holding the line,
It really makes you wonder, are we measuring the wrong things? Does the actual quality of an institution rely on its budget and its buildings? Or does it rely entirely on the culture that holds it together when that budget runs out?
that is definitely something for you all to chew on as we wrap up. That is it for this deep dive into the incredibly resilient history of Dow. Thanks for listening.
Always a pleasure to be here.
We will see you on the next one.